Joining me now is EJ Antoni, Heritage Foundation Chief Economist, and Michael Faulkender, former Deputy Treasury Secretary. Gentlemen, great to see you. First of all, EJ, the rolling back the fuel economy standards, how big a deal is that for car owners and people who want to buy a car?
David, I think it's huge for a couple of reasons. Not only are you reducing that upfront cost of new cars, you're making it easier for people to transfer from a used car to a newer used car, if you will. That's important not only from a cost savings perspective, it's making it cheaper for those people to do that. It's also important from a safety perspective, because with these regulations that we saw from the Biden administration that greatly increase the cost of a vehicle, one of the negative side effects is it incentivizes you to keep an older, unsafe car on the road longer, because you can't afford now the much larger expense of getting into a relatively newer car. So this is a move by the Trump administration to not only save money, but even to save lives.
Unintended consequences. The previous administration had no clue about how all of this would affect people. And that goes, Michael, also for interest rates, I think. I mean, in particular, some data just came in today that was very interesting that spoke to this. About the tariffs, we had the import-export prices. They came in flat in September. Of course, it was backdated to September because of the shutdown. But for all the worrying, the quaking and shaking by the Fed about the effect of tariffs on inflation, we have flat inflation because of import and exports. And we had the ADB come in with a loss of 32,000 jobs for November. We were expecting a 10,000 job increase in jobs. Instead, we had a negative 32,000 number. Isn't that the perfect recipe for a rate cut?
It is, David, because if you've got pressure on the job market, if it looks like circumstances are such that hiring is declining and that layoffs are beginning, then that suggests that there's a weak job market. Again, some of that's coming from the unnecessary government shutdown you just referenced, that put a lag on the economy. But you couple that with the fact that we haven't seen the pass-through into consumer prices from the tariffs, and it suggests that there are low inflationary pressures coupled with pressure on the job market, and so it suggests that a rate cut is imminent. And then if I could also add to something EJ just talked about with the CAFE standards. The other thing that the Biden administration was wanting to do was push people into electric vehicles that they did not want. And so partially it's about curbing inflationary pressures of eliminating these CAFE standards that the Biden administration put in place, but also it's bringing choice back to the marketplace and letting Americans buy the car they want.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, because EJ, I had a big debate on air a couple of months before he left office with Buttigieg when he was transportation, claiming and swearing that once people buy an electric car, they're never going to want to change. And it just didn't add up. It didn't add up to what people actually wanted. I harken back to Milton Friedman's most famous book, Free to Choose. I mean, as Michael was just saying, Americans weren't free to choose.
Exactly. And if these electric cars really were so great, then on top of all the subsidies and everything else that the government gives, not just a subsidy to you as the consumer for buying them, but the subsidy to the company who produces them, you would think people would be going out en masse to buy these things, but they're not, because as you said, David, consumers simply don't want them.
Right. It was a great point that Michael brought. And Michael, affordability. Let's talk about it. I think the key of the affordability question is housing, and there is a problem with housing. The monthly costs of owning a house have gone from I believe it was $1,200 in 2019 to $2,700, more than doubled in just 6 years. The previous 6 years, by the way, from 2019 backwards, it was essentially flat. But to have it more than double in 6 years was a problem. And of course, it was the problem with inflation. And the pandemic did play a role, because it was harder to get the goods needed to build a house. But also those interest rates going up as a result of the Biden inflation. And there's another point, which is that if you listen carefully to the socialists who are out there talking about housing and what they want, you always hear them talking about rents, never about home ownership. That's because they don't want home ownership. Mamdani is clear about it. He uses Marxist lingo talking about decommodifying housing, taking the value, the private sector value of housing out of that particular equity and handing it over to the government. That's what their key is. That's what the socialists want, and they're not coming out and saying it directly, but we can.
Yeah, David, in the 2024 election, we know from polling that for voters under 35, home affordability was their largest issue. And if you look at the factors that you were just discussing, let me add in another one that both Fed Governor Myron and Vice President Vance have talked about, which is that when under the Biden administration you have millions of undocumented illegal immigrants coming into the country needing a place to stay, and there is no offsetting or commensurate construction to create those additional units, we're now going to go through the reverse of that. As you have self-deportations going on, that's going to take some of the pressure off of housing. Now, the problem is that you have people like Mayor-elect Mamdani who think that the solution is rent control, but in fact, there's a lot of data out there as to how many rental units in New York are off the market because it costs more to bring them up to code than the rent control law allows the landlord to charge. And so rent control has proven itself over and over again to be a failure, and yet it's the only tool in the socialist toolbox that Mamdani is going back to.
But EJ, the problem is they don't care if it's a failure because they want to end private ownership, whether it's a house that you're using for yourself or a house that you're renting out to others. And just to put a fine point on what they're talking about, how they would change the economy if the socialists get what they want, to take away the equity, the private equity of housing. Americans own $55 trillion worth of home equity. $55 trillion. What would happen to our economy if we were to take $55 trillion of equity out of the hands of private owners and put it into the government?
I would say, David, the same thing that happens anytime you take anything out of the private sector and give it to the public sector. You ruin it at the end of the day. Look, it's all about incentives, right? Incentives matter. And the reason we have $50-something trillion in private home equity is because people have an incentive to save and invest in their own home, right? To keep up that home. And it doesn't even matter
if it's... And to build equity, to build capital. Americans love building capital of their own. It's called capitalism for a reason. It's not just for dealing with corporations. It's individuals need capital of their own, and most of their equity, most of Americans' equity is more than anything else is tied up in the equity of their homes. Michael, I just want to mention one more thing because Donald Trump is always coming out with surprises, and he's mentioned this before, but he's more direct about it, talking about ending income tax. Let me play the soundbite and get your reaction. Roll it.
Next year is projected to be the largest tax refund season ever, and we're going to be giving back refunds out of the tariffs because we've taken in literally trillions of dollars, and we're going to be giving a nice dividend to the people. And I believe that at some point in the not too distant future, you won't even have income tax to pay because the money we're taking in is so great, it's so enormous, that you're not going to have income tax to pay.
Only 25 seconds on this one, but is it feasible that we could end income tax in the next 4 years?
So, David, when we were negotiating the big, beautiful bill, one of the points that I made repeatedly to members of Congress is that the tariff revenue is an offset that we can use to help, cover the static score of the tax bill. And so, we can simultaneously engage in fiscal discipline and extend pro-growth tax reform because of the president's tariff program.
Can we get rid of income tax quickly, EJ?
Well, if you can figure out a way to cut government spending from about 20% of the national income down to about 3%, you have a chance.
All right. Well, a chance is better than nothing. Gentlemen, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. EJ Antoni and Michael Faulkender.